Sir John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Mrs Harris. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd also like to thank the chair of the Petition Committee for introducing the debate, and through him Mr Michael Westwood, who has given us an opportunity to debate these matters. I am proud to rise to speak on behalf of the constituents of Maldon, 8,057 of whom had signed the petition by the time of the start of this debate. It's probably increased even further since then. We are the second highest constituency, beaten only by the electors of my honourable friend, the member for Brentwood and Ongar, who I'm sure would be here as well were he not serving on the front bench. I have to say that I share the sentiments behind the petition in full, but as has already been pointed out, clearly under our system, the ability to have another general election does not exist unless there is a remarkable change in the view of either the Prime Minister or of Parliament. Our system is designed to deliver a, quote, strong and stable government, and most of the time it does that, and I remain a supporter of the system of government, even though I understand the anger felt by the honourable gentleman who spoke from Clacton. It is the case that our system was built essentially for when there were two main parties, with perhaps a third minority. We now have not just a third, but a fourth, and even in some areas a fifth minority, and that has produced this extraordinary result that the present government has a majority of 100 seats in Parliament, having achieved fewer votes than that party achieved under the leadership of the last leader of the Labour Party, the member for Islington North. But that is the system that we have. But I think the reason why this petition has attracted such support and so quickly is the fact not that people just dislike what this government is doing, but they do feel, as the petitioner sets out, that it is a direct breach of the promises that were made to the electorate at the time of the last general election. Even within a few weeks of the election, I was receiving angry emails from pensioners who had been misled. They had listened to claims by Labour spokesmen during the election that if they voted Conservative, a Conservative government might abolish the winter fuel allowance. The implication of that was that a Labour government would be safe and would protect the winter fuel allowance. And yet a few weeks later, it was announced that it would go. That was followed a few weeks later by the farmers. The farmers in my constituency had been to the NFU conference. They had listened to the leader of the Labour Party tell them from the platform that there was no intention of the Labour government to get rid of agricultural property relief. And yet, in the budget, that was precisely what was announced, with the consequence that families who have farmed in my area for generations, going back to their great-grandparents, now say that they are going to have to sell up because they will not be able to afford the inheritance tax bill. I've also had letters from small businesses who understood that working people would not see a tax rise, and yet they are the people who employ those working people, and now find that their entire profit has been wiped out by the increase in national insurance contributions, with the result that they are either going to have to scrap pay rises this year, or in some cases actually lay off staff. And then, in my area, well represented in the petition, as my honourable friend from Rochford has pointed out, in Essex, we are faced with what was already a massive amount of development taking place with no corollary in terms of infrastructure. And yet, the new housing targets that have been imposed in Chelmsford represent an increase of 100% on that which was already being required. In Maldon, in Maldon it was 100%, in Chelmsford it was 60%. And yet there is no sign of the infrastructure investment. And those targets are being imposed on our local communities, despite the Labour Party saying that they would take account of the feelings of local communities. In all these areas, people listened to what they were told in the election and found that actually the new government has done precisely the reverse of what was promised.
Well, my right honourable friend
of course I'll give way.
I'm completely opposed to increasing VAT on school fees. But Labour did at least put that in their manifesto. As my right honourable friend constituents, have they spoken to him in the way that mine has spoken to me and said one of the reasons they're so angry about the decision on winter fuel allowance is it wasn't in the manifesto, they weren't told that's what they were voting for, and therefore Labour have no mandate for it at all?
I entirely sympathise with the point made by my right honourable friend, and it is the case that winter fuel was a very direct breach of an undertaking given. But even VAT on schools, which he correctly says was actually in the Labour Party manifesto, but it was said that the money that was to be raised, if there is indeed any money, which I think a number of us doubt, but that would be invested in employing teachers and go into schools. And yet we have now heard in the last few days that there is no guarantee of that at all. It will just go into the Treasury. And the assurances that were given about how this would benefit state pupils have proved, again, worthless. Ms Harris, there is not going to be an election unless something extraordinary happens. Under our system, only the Prime Minister or Parliament can call an election early. And if we look back, I suspect the Leader of the House is the only other one here who can remember when the Labour government was brought down in a vote of confidence in 1979. I think with a majority of 170, that is probably unlikely to happen. Prime Ministers who have called elections earlier than 5 years that has not always been a wise decision, as indeed was certainly the case in 2017 and indeed arguably in 2024. So the truth is, we are likely to have this government in power for probably the next 5 years, but I believe it is unlikely to be longer. We will use that time to regain the trust. The new leader of the Conservative Party is right, that we have work to do. We didn't get everything right. Indeed, we made some bad mistakes, and we need to learn from that. And just as the Conservative Party did in 1974 and in 1997, we reflected on the reasons why we lost, and we worked hard to regain trust. But in the meantime, of that 5 years, we also have a job to do to hold this government to account. And I echo the remarks of the Father of the House. Even if this debate does not bring about a general election, I hope that members on the government side will listen to the voices expressed in the terms of the 3 million signatures on the petition.